welcome everybody from my side. My name is Sebastian Eiter. I'm supposed to guide you through this coming session. I'm a geographer and landscape ecologist by education. I work at the Department of Landscape Monitoring at NIBIO, the Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research. For the last 10 years, I've been involved in different networks and projects on urban agriculture. And within the EdiCitNet project, I have a shared responsibility for the work packages, which is on documentation and monitoring of economic, social, and environmental effects of edible city solutions. So that's why Ina referred. It was a very nice transition with this last question. So how do we make the participants feeling joy in measuring things, maybe? Or do we scientists have to do it ourselves? The session has got the title Voices from the Ground in the Edible City Solutions. It will consist out of 5 presentations. We will start with the invited guest speaker, Martina Artmann, with research-based reflections on human-food relations in cities. And then we will turn to presentations from our EdiCitNet project. Robert Shaw will provide insights as an urban gardening practitioner in our project's hybrid frontrunner and follower city of Berlin. Then we will have 2 presentations from other EdiCitNet frontrunner cities on the monitoring of different effects of edible city solutions. Thea Nørvåg, Marit Kvernmoen, Pia Christiansen, and 2 of their colleagues have studied social aspects of participating in the EdiCitNet Living Lab in Oslo. Anneli Karlsson will present a study with environmental focus on beetle monitoring in the Andernach Living Lab, maybe ground beetles, so it's really voices from the ground. And finally, Anna Angli will take a kind of more planning-oriented perspective, maybe. She will present a strategy for advancing agroecological education in Sant Feliu de Llobregat, one of the EdiCitNet Follower Cities. I guess most of you who are present in the introductory session. However, again, there are basically 2 ways to interact for all you in the audience. The Q&A box at the bottom of the screen is open to ask questions, either to one or more speakers. Indicate by putting that person's name into the questions, or to all speakers. We will have a kind of roundtable presentation in the end. All you can comment on or support someone else's questions, give it a like, upvote it, and we will try to advance it in the queue. The questions will be either answered live or individually written by the panelists afterwards, depends on our time schedule. The chat will remain open to everyone to talk to each other, but please don't put the questions there. They may easily be overseen. And you can also send requests to the tech team in the background if you have any questions to them in the chat. Finally, we have an illustrator present in the background. His name is Johnny Glover. He will accompany us, try to draw the session and capture key points. He will work backstage. However, we will try and have a look at his image just before the lunch break at 1 p.m. in almost 2 hours. I'm looking much forward to the session. And now I would like to give the floor to Martina Artmann. She's a research scientist and junior group leader at the Leibniz Institute of Ecological, Urban and Regional Development in Dresden, Germany, with her presentation on resonating human-food relations in cities, getting in touch with the food we eat. Please, Martina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction and invitation to this conference. I'm very happy that I'm part of it and to share some ideas and thoughts we have in the course of our work in the research group on urban human-nature resonance and also in the project on edible cities. The starting point of my presentation is the hypothesis that we are not only facing a crucial social ecological crisis, but this crisis is linked with mute relationships with the food we eat and produce. And I don't only want to describe the problem, but I also want to suggest a potential solution how to overcome this relationship crisis while focusing on the theory of resonance and also to translate it into human food relationships. So, like I've said, my starting point is really the big picture. And I guess you know that we are really face to face with an urgent sustainability crisis. And this crisis gets visible, for instance, by climate change, by the loss of biodiversity, or also the increasing injustice, such as between the global north and the global south. And I think it's the responsibility of the researchers, policy, and everybody living on this beautiful earth to be aware that this crisis is linked with the way we are producing food and also our related diets. For instance, when it comes to climate change, every food we eat comes with a carbon cost. Especially the livestock farming has a very negative impact on climate change and is also linked with a big amount of deforestation, such as of the rainforest. Also, biodiversity loss is linked with negative impacts of agriculture. Here, I want to bring you an example from Germany. And in the last decades, 2/3, that means 75% of the insect biomass in protected areas got lost. And experts found and suggest that this is also due to the pesticides of the surrounding landscape areas. And this is really dramatic because the insects, they're important for ecosystem services, such as the pollination, but of course they also have an intrinsic value. And this brings me to the issue of injustice and the questions, why do we love cats and dogs? And why do we exploit and kill cows or chickens or pigs? And an example of this injustice is also the fact that only in Germany, every day, 2 million animals are slaughtered. And if each day as many people would die as animals slaughtered, Germany would have no population anymore in only 42 days. But this sick relationship with our food gets also visible when we look at ourselves. And for instance, 1/3 of the food which is produced worldwide is produced for the garbage. And with this amount of food, we could feed twice the number of undernourished people. But if you think that there are more undernourished people than overweights, this is not true anymore, and this changed just recently. And there are in fact more overweight people suffering from obesity than underweight. And I think these few facts, and there are even more, they really show that there's something wrong with the relationship with our food. And this relationship, which is not really healthy and not sustainable, is tracing back also the mute human-nature relationship and a worldview which is found especially in westernized societies, which think that we humans are on the top of everything else. And this gives us the right that we can dominate, manipulate, and exploit non-human nature. And this is seen as a root cause of the sustainability crisis. And the question is then how we can repair this relationship. And we think in our work, it makes sense to look at the theory of resonance. And in the next 2 slides, I will explain you a little bit about this theory. We are relating this theory to the work by Hartmut Rosa. He is a professor in sociology in Germany, and he's dealing a lot with modern societies and describing the societies which is facing an increasing escalation. And he's criticizing that this phenomenon is characterized by an increasing alienation to the relationships we hold with the world, such as the bullshit shops, or also with our body we just have seen, but also with nature. And to provide here a solution, he suggests that resonance can be considered a positive counterterm for alienation, which he's calling also mute relations. And resonance then provides a descriptive framework to describe the qualities of relationships. And at the same time, resonance is also providing a normative standard how a good life in our modern society can look like. So maybe you still remember the term resonance from school, for instance, from the physics. And in this context, resonance describes relationships between two entities which are embedded into a co-vibrating system. And these both entities are reinforcing one another. And Hartmut Rosa uses here the term resonance as a metaphor to describe responsive relationships between humans and the world. And according to him, resonating relationships have different characteristics. So if you want to develop a resonating relationship, first you have to get affected. This means this is a passive experience, so that the relating identity is really touching you, it is gripping you. And it is then the opposite of being indifferent. But this is not sufficient. And the next step, you should also respond to it. And by these different interactions, by getting affecting and responding to one another, a transformation is happening. This transformation is not necessarily life-changing, but it means that we are somehow relating a different way to one another. And in the next step in our work, we are wondering how we can translate the theory of resonance from sociology when it comes to human nature and to human food relationships in an urban context. In this regard, just remember or think about how in daily life you are affected by the food you are eating and buying, and also how far you are really affected by the interlinkages of the food and its impacts on environment and nature. So I guess in our daily life, we mostly consume food from the supermarket. And in the supermarket, often this food is wrapped by plastic, and sometimes you don't even recognize how the food looked like from the original point of view. Also, cities are mostly very hectic. In our daily life, it's often about fast food and to consume very fast some food so we are not hungry anymore. But the question if it's really nourishing us, how do we feel with the food we eat, is mostly forgotten. And in this regard, it's also crucial that there are very high numbers of single households, because current research also suggests that eating alone is much more unhealthier than eating in community. So the question is, how do we get affected by the food we eat and consume in cities in a way that we respond to it by acting more sustainable? That means, for instance, eating more vegan food or regional food or organic food. So the hypothesis is that we are mostly getting not affected in external terms, not, and neither in internal terms. So it's a complex issue, but I just can provide you some example. In material terms, like I've said before, we mostly consume our food in supermarkets. And there's often a really over-representation of so many different kinds of food. And that doesn't matter if it's, for instance, really growing in the season, like strawberries. So it is really about that each type of food we are wishing to eat is always available. And in this regard, we don't experience the process behind how the food is really produced. Also, for instance, slaughterhouses are very much outside place in the city. And when you eat a steak, you maybe forget that behind it is an animal which is also feeling and have the needs for family bonds, for instance. So we are hypothesizing that this affection, which is crucial to develop resonance, is really blocked by the spatial distance where food is produced, also our consumption orientation, and this external over-availability of the food. So how to overcome this distance? Here it is crucial to look into our internal dimension, how we feel, what we know, what our worldviews are. And here it's important, and like I've said before, not only to look at the final product, like the steak, but to really know what is behind this product, which impacts it has on energy, water demand, and in ethical terms also to increase our empathy also for animals which are suffering because we are hungry for a steak or a sausage. So we need to take into account the complexity which is linked when it comes to food production, and also to overcome what we are knowing in terms of acting then also sustainable. That means we need to take into account the moral unavailability of nature and the ecological justice. And in this regard, I want to present you a potential intervention, how we can foster really external and internal human nature food resonance. And I think here urban gardening can play really a very important role. And this shows also some results of our project on edible cities. I will present you here a special case study on urban vegetable gardens in Munich. So Munich is in the south of Germany. It has over 1.5 million inhabitants, and it's a really still fast growing city, and there's a very high pressure on the urban green spaces. And therefore it's really important to bring back food and nature into the city. And this urban vegetable garden project, it's a collaborative project between the city administration, urban farmers, and also the residents. And you can see here on the map that the different spots of this project and the urban vegetable gardens are parts of the urban farming areas of the fringe. And they are separated in plots. They can have between 30 or 60 square meters. They are mostly prepared for the urban residents by the farmers, and the residents can then hire these vegetable gardens for one season to produce their own food. And the questions we were looking for to solve is about first and conceptual thinking how different kinds of human food connections can look like, and which type of these relationships have the potential to motivate for pro-environmental food behavior. And we did then a standardized survey with 255 vegetable gardeners in Munich. We got a lot of results, but I only want to present you the most important ones. So to find out which types of human food connections are possible in the urban gardeners, we did a principal component analysis to cluster the data, and we found that we can distinguish 4 different types dimensions. And what is really interesting, they are differing really between external human food connections and internal ones. External one, the first most important one we named food interaction. And this means how the garden is used for physical activities, also for recreation, but also for nature observation, for instance. The second external dimension is linked with activities related with harvesting different kinds of foods in their amounts in one season. And we also could distinguish 2 different internal dimensions. One is food discovery. This means how the gardeners could really find out that the food they are harvesting is really healthy or tasty. And the second internal dimension is about the food identity the gardeners hold, also about the global awareness, how food and diet is linked to environmental impacts. So and especially this food consciousness we have called it, this is a global sphere. The other 3 dimensions are really linked to the garden on the side, and this food consciousness is more on a overall scale because it's not directly linked to the garden. And we found that especially this global perspective and this awareness about food is important because it is translating into pro-environmental food behavior, such as to focus more on regional or organic food. Nevertheless, we also found that all dimensions are interrelated with each other. And therefore, we developed a so-called embodied model for human food connections. And it means that that starting point can be considered the immediate garden body activity. That means that by gardening, the food harvesting, we develop an idea how the food is growing. And this is very closely related then to the immediate garden mind activity, to really feel, to taste, to smell the value of the food harvested. And this is then related to develop this global food mind activity. So this food consciousness, that the way how we produce food is closely linked to the nature. And this again is translating into the pro-environmental food behavior. So this means the urban vegetable garden can be a very good intervention to act locally and to think globally. And this shows really the value of gardening for sustainable development in cities and beyond. And this was also seen by some comments we got by the gardeners. For instance, that this vegetable garden is considered really a starting point for conscious way of living and to adapt their eating habits. And that the gardeners don't eat vegetables anymore from the garden market because they're not tasty anymore. But it's not only about the relationship we have with our garden, but also with, for instance, other people, such as children, and really to learn to experience the food, where it is coming from. Or also to strengthen the relationships with the farmers, who are such important actors in our society. So all in all, it makes sense to look at food through a relational approach. And in the end, to really foster resonating human food relationships, we need, first of all, to set societal boundaries in material terms, to really think about which food is produced when, with which environmental impact, but also what I think is really important, also to set limits to the immaterial availability of non-human nature. So to really consider that, for instance, animals and also the soil, they have a quality and an intrinsic value, and we should care for them like we are caring for our family members. In the end, some further crucial questions are then when we go back to the hypothesis that affect is a major starting point for resonating relationships. So what is touching you? What is inspiring you? What is really moving your heart to engage in sustainable diets, such as for vegan food? And if it's not touching you when you see animals killing, why? Nevertheless, it's not only about the internal shift, it also needs an external perspective. And how can we create urban structures in which it was very easy to foster sustainable diets, for instance, like in the canteens? And in the end, what I think is really very important from a relational approach is when we are really aware that food has agency, how it is changing our relationship with it and also with nature. For instance, food is such an important issue because we are eating it and we are merging it with our body. So when you're eating, for instance, animals and the stress hormones they have in the slaughterhouse, how it is really translating into our blood. There's also very interesting research out there. So these issues should just inspire you. And if you're interested how far we are getting with this question in our project, you're warmly invited to visit our project web homepage on Urban Human Nature Resonance. We also have here a blog, and also here the PhD from the group, Mabel Killinger, she's doing her PhD on human food resonance. And yeah, invite you really to follow her work and our work of the team. And if you're interested in the study on the vegetable gardens, it's also published open access. So thank you very much for the invitation and your attention, and see you.
Okay, Martina, thank you very much for this inspiring and thought-provoking presentation on resonance versus alienation and resonating relationships, which we may hear a bit more about during the next presentations. So I'm curious. One question had come in, but I think that was before you started to present it, your practical study. It was just directed towards how do you integrate the concept of resonance into your research, and I think you basically answered that already, or we could get back to it in the common discussion towards the end, of course. Yeah, the next presenter is Robert Shaw. He's a co-founder, actually 13 years ago, and a member of the Urban Agriculture Initiative Prinzessinnengarten in Berlin. Prinzessinnengarten has a strong role in the EdiCitNet Living Lab activities in Berlin. And that's exactly what Robert is going to present, I guess, from his title, Edible Insights from the Urban Gardens in Berlin. Please, Robert.
That's it. Just from our urban garden, not from all of them. So I'm going to, hello, as Sebastian said, just to be sure, I've got 15 minutes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Robert Shaw, as Sebastian said, co-founder of Prinzessinnengarten, and I'm just going to present you what we do. Nothing else. It's not very interpreting or anything else. I'm going to share my screen. Right. I'm allowed to present you 15 minutes of insights from Prinzessinnengarten. And I'm trying to be fast because there's a lot to tell. So just to start with who we are, we're in a non-profit organization called Nomadic Green. That's because we started with mobile gardening concept, mobile urban farming concept, basically. But in the core, although we do a lot of other things at the moment, we're a community garden, which has been founded in 2009. We made the concept in 2008 and we founded it in 2009. So we managed to survive for 12 years, which I find quite fascinating. At the moment, we're one of the few community gardens who don't only do voluntarily work. We have paid work in the garden as well, because for us, it's a method to keep the people and have more impact. So at the moment, we have 31 employees, people really been living from the garden. And very important for us, we take decisions, we work together as a group, as a collective. That includes not only the people employed, that includes the volunteers in the garden as well. So we take decisions together, which is quite a lot of talking sometimes. Here you can see a nice picture from a garden in Hellersdorf. You'll hear more about that. So what do we do is the next one. We're basically running 2 community gardens. They're both living labs in EdiCitNet, so you're going to hear about them. We're setting up gardens for various target groups. That means we support the setup of community gardens, but as well gardens in schools and kindergartens, at companies, at refugee homes, hospitals, very different places where we try to establish the positive effects a garden can have on people. We're running a restaurant with crops from the garden, not only with crops from the garden, but nowadays, because the garden has grew, mostly we're setting up school gardens. This is a big issue for us. We do a lot of school gardening. We do educational work in the school gardens, but as well, we do it with adults. We do the people working for a company where a garden is. Wherever a garden is, we try to not really educate in a model like we're the teacher and they're the pupils. It's more like working together in the garden. It's experiencing what happens there. This is our basic setting. We do social and educational work in public green spaces. It's quite new to us. The city of Berlin gave us the job to do kind of a social work in 3 Berlin public parks. which is very interesting for us. It's not about vegetables though. And we do project work, like in EdiCitNet. We had projects all through all the 12 years we're working in urban gardening now, but we hardly ever had a project which gave us that much freedom to try out new things like EdiCitNet does. You're going to hear more about that soon as well. That's a little guided tour in one of the gardens. Just some numbers to give you a glimpse of the size we're talking about. Per year, we have about 50,000 visitors. So people just come by and have a look at the garden or visit some event or something. We have about 6,000 participants, so people who really do gardening with us. It's not only gardening at the moment. We have open studios for wood and metal and stuff like that as well, but it's mainly gardening. And the large number is probably due to our very open system of participation. You can always come and just step in. You don't have to sign anything or become a member. We set up or co-set up over 160 urban gardens. These are very different gardens. Can be just 3 raised beds in the kindergarten, can be 3,500 square meters at a theater in Cologne. But basically we think every new garden is positive, so we're always willing to help. And we set up more than 60 school gardens and work in them then in an educational way. This is our little hut where we sell our young plants. We have a greenhouse, we grow them ourselves. What do we do in EdiCitNet? So this is, EdiCitNet is one part of our work, and we mainly try to do new things within that project. And I'm going to tell you what we are doing there. First of all, we're participating in the master plan process. You know, EdiCitNet's got, Berlin has got this hybrid function in EdiCitNet, so we're co-participating on the master plan process, and we co-hosting together with the Senate in Berlin 2 living labs at 2 different locations, and each living lab has 3 EdiCity solutions we're working on at the moment. First of all, where are the living labs? One is in Neukölln. This is a very dense city center quarter, very multicultural. And they're quite interesting. We had to move the garden in 2019, but well, basically we wanted to move the garden in 2019 because we had the opportunity to go onto an old cemetery. In Germany, you have the situation that cemeteries don't need 50% of their space anymore for burying, and nobody knows what to do with it. They're very places of a huge biodiversity. Normally you can't build houses on them, so we kind of not in concurrence with the building, and they're not in use for burying anymore, so nobody really knows what to do. The city doesn't want them as parks because they're too expensive, too much old trees and stuff, and they have very long running times. We have a perspective there now of 26 years. So we decided to move on to that Neue St. Jacobi Cemetery, it's called. It's 7.5 hectares large. We're using about 4 hectares of that. And as I said, huge biodiversity. You can see it here, left-hand side, the green space is the former airport in Berlin, Tempelhofer Feld. Then right-hand side, you can see all the old buildings. At the bottom, there's a tube station, a big one, and the cemetery is the one with the green circle around. And there are plans, you're going to hear about that later on, to build at the front and the back of the cemetery. Our first EdiCity solution we're working on is called Cultural and Culinary Action Days. These are mainly meant to involve the multicultural neighborhood even more than we do already. It's practically, it means once a month, we're offering a day, which we call Action Day, with several workshops. Most of the workshops, well, big part of the workshops are done and suggested by the people from the neighborhood themselves. Like here on the left-hand side, you can see Buzian. His workshop is to cook North African food and invite people from his community, Algerian, and from the neighborhood to eat with him. We've got gardening parts in it, building up raised beds. We got all different kind of things on these Action Days. They're just like a potpourri of offers to the neighborhood, and they're working pretty well. We got around 30 to 70 participants, depending on the weather, like it always is in urban gardens. The second edible city solution we're working on is cemetery conversion and mourning. Now, there is a reason that we're on the cemetery. The culture of burying and mourning is changing in Germany, and therefore these spaces are kind of abandoned. And it's not the first change in mourning culture in the history, but it's a quite massive change at the moment. People bury smaller, bury less long, in different alternative ways and stuff like that. And we think, or we want to find out if community garden can be part of that change. So to do so, we do workshop, we do guided tours. Because nobody really knows about that situation of cemeteries, we first of all inform people about it and try to work out together with, for example, a mourning group, how can we be part of that change. The third edible city solution is quite ambitious there. It's a research center, New City Nature. The background is, with moving to the cemetery, we had an apply for funding for a new building, an environmental education center, which is probably going to be built in 2024 and going to be run by us as Prinzessin Garden on the spot. And we want to make that program, and by planning the program as well, design the building in a participative way with neighborhood and universities. So what we did is we kind of renovated a little room. You can see it here. It used to be a studio where you can do your nails, and then it was empty, and we kind of renovated it. We offered to the neighborhood and scientists for free, so they can do workshop events, whatever they want to do in it. And through that, monitoring that, we try to develop the program of the future environmental education center. Right. Now, coming to the second spot where the second living lab is at. This is in Hellersdorf, very different than Neukölln. It's a northeast suburb, a quarter of Berlin, high level of poverty there. And since 2015, we run a second community garden there, in the center of the former village called Hellersdorf, before it became a quarter of Berlin. They built all the social housing around it in the 1980s. Before that, this used to be a countryside. And the garden there is supposed to be an interface between social challenges and a tolerant, peaceful coexistence. Sounds quite clear, but it's not that easy sometimes in that spot. You can see it here, the red circle at the bottom is the historical center of the village. Then all the yellow ones is a social housing company, real estate company owned by the city of Berlin. They're going to build 1,500 new flats there. And the little green spots are the gardens. The garden wanted to move as well because we knew the flats were going to be built, and we wanted to move a place where we have more impact on the situation. So the first edible city solution there is located to the move. It's called Gutsgarten. That's the name of the garden in transition. The garden has moved due to address the new neighborhood as well as the old neighborhood and kind of bring them together. We do that in a concrete way through, you can see it here, right hand side. It's in the process of being built at that moment where the photo was taken, building a multifunctional room for events. The middle picture is just a move, and the left-hand side was a little concert there. So we try to address all the people, invite them to participate in the garden and all its offers, and had to rebuild the infrastructure for that. The second edible city solution is quite ambitious as well. It's an edible landscaping concept where we try to integrate edible companion green into the plans of the social housing company building the flats there. The whole area is 28 hectares. And we try to integrate fruit trees, edible hedges. There's a historical garden with herbs of 7,500 square meters. And then the idea is to take care, for example, of the fruit trees by doing educational work on what can you do with the fruits and offering that to the neighborhood. We already started, you can see it here. This is Kai Gilthorn, he's partner in EdiCitNet as well, from an organization called Mundraub, and he, for example, is doing a course on how to cut a fruit tree. This is quite interesting because it has this whole edible city solution we have to work top down, bottom up together. We're the bottom up and the social housing company is top down. And you can see there quite some different speeds and ideas on how to do it. And the third edible city solution in Hellersdorf is product development. This is very basic. We're developing a product with an own brand. We focus at the moment, it's not only Hellersdorf, we do it in both gardens, Neukölln as well. The focus at the moment, because it's the most easy thing to do, is on herbs, where we dry them for tea and we do syrup out of the herbs. We've done that already. We're in the third year of producing. We have our own label now, and all these products are grown, harvested, and proceeds at both locations together with all the volunteers there. And it's quite nice work, and it's quite beautiful to see the product then afterwards. So this is what we're basically working at in EdiCitNet. And here you can see left-hand side some of the herbs, right-hand side how they're harvested. In the middle, one of the people drying the herbs, but at the moment she has grapes in the picture. It doesn't matter, she does the same thing with herbs as well. And that was basically what we're working at in EdiCitNet. I just wanted to say thank you to this project to be allowed to try out all these things. Just remember, in the core, we are a community garden, a bit like what Mary taught about. And without this project, we wouldn't have the opportunity to try out things like I've just presented them now. So thank you, and thank you for listening. That was it.
Thank you very much, Robert, for this insight. I hope this has given all of you in the audience who may not be so familiar with our project a certain idea of what can be an edible city solution and what is going on in the different living labs. And yeah, at this example of Berlin, and that may actually be a very good basis for proceeding with the coming presentations. Quite a couple of questions have accumulated in the chat, Robert, in particular to you. And I think most of them are focusing on the experience you have and how you have overcome obstacles, and then where you have experienced challenges, where you do experience or expect challenges from the future. And I think people are keen to learn a lot from you. I fear many of them will need to be answered written individually in advance. Maybe, yeah, the challenges in the past that made you almost give up, and today's challenges. Could you briefly summarize the ones you think were very important?
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, it's like Mary said, our main spirit is to run a joyful place with an impact on sustainability and all the other issues. But the challenges definitely in the past were to be able to keep the space, because we're on some kind of wasteland, and it belonged to the city of Berlin, but still they wanted to build buildings on there. We couldn't compete in terms of money with that. So we had to really fight for the space, and space is a challenge for all the community gardens I know. And the second one, ongoing since the garden is there till now, is to deal with bureaucracy, basically. That is our main challenge. And the reason is not that we're so stupid and unable to do it. It's because the idea of German bureaucracy doesn't fit the idea of a non-plannable participative decision-making in the garden. Bureaucracy always wants to know, how is it going to look in 5 years? And we can't tell that, because we say, sorry, we've got people coming to us and they're going to decide on that. So I think finding a solution there, finding a category for urban gardens, which gives them a little freedom in their decision-making, that is our main challenge.
Thank you very much, Robert. Unfortunately, I almost say we have to proceed. And well, I mean, a lot of interesting things are to come. Yeah, we proceed to Pia, Marit, and Thea, who are master students in public health science at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences here in Norway, south of Oslo. and they have prepared a presentation on the Linderud neighborhood and community garden. What motivates the users, and what wishes do they have?
Thank you. I just have to share my screen. First, we want to say thank you for the opportunity to present our findings about Linderud neighborhood and community garden. As a part of our master's degree in public health at the Norwegian University of Life Science, we got the opportunity to look closer at this EdiCitNet project. We chose to examine the motivation for use and future wishes about Linderud neighborhood and community garden. 3 of us are presenting today. It's me, Thea, and then Marit and Pia. Linderud neighborhood and community garden is located in Bjerke district in Oslo, which is the capital of Norway. The garden lies next to a shopping center and a highway. The farm is a natural cultural monument and is protected. When the neighborhood and community garden was established in 2020, the land had been fallow for about 60 years. As part of the EU project EdiCitNet, the Agency of Urban Environment in Oslo and NIBIO collaborated on using a living lab methodology. They used it to establish an open and accessible space for innovative urban food production, sustainable business models, and circular research use. The research issue. In the documentation of the Living Lab in 2020, a survey was carried out to investigate why people took part of the neighborhood and community garden. Our research issue was to investigate whether the motivation had changed since last year's survey, and in our presentation we will shortly answer that question. We used Splot as a method to answer our research question. Splot is a method developed by 2 Norwegians, Aina Hagen and Jenny Osulsen. Splot stands for Space, Person, Learning, Observations, and Tracks. It is a dialogue-based approach where the participants make drawings or write down keywords about what's important about the place, followed by a conversation, and in addition to walking around to look at some of their favorite areas. During and after conducting the Splot, we wrote field notes and interview notes, and notes of the observations. We defined everyone who participated in the events at the neighborhood and community garden as users of the garden. We asked people in the garden if they wanted to participate voluntarily in our study. For the thematic analysis, we coded the data material, both the Splots, field notes, and interview notes. This means that we labeled and organized the data to identify different teams and relationships between them. Then, to be able to compare with the findings from 2020, we grouped the codes by the same overall indicators. We also performed a member check, which we will talk about later. Now I give the word to Marit.
This word cloud shows all the words that were written or drawn in the Splots. The words that were mentioned most frequently as a motivation for participating in the garden were vegetables, social, gardening, plants, nature, diversity, knowledge, neighborhood, and organic. In total, 18 people participated in the Splot method. We coded all the words from the Splots into 6 different indicators, which are the same indicators used in the 2020 survey. The indicators are gardening, social aspect, neighborhood, activities, feelings, and aesthetics. Social aspect was the indicator that motivated most people to come to Linderud neighborhood and community garden. The participants mentioned that the garden was a great opportunity to connect with people and be a part of a community. Then words in the indicator gardening and aesthetics were frequently mentioned. It was mentioned that the vegetables were free of pesticides and came straight from the ground. Neighborhood was the indicator that was mentioned fewest times, and one reason for this finding may be that it is not required that the users in the garden must live in the Linderud district. These pie charts show how often show the positive associations that motivate the users and the differences between the findings in 2020 and in 2021. As you can see, the results are very similar in the 2 years, but they were slightly less focused on neighborhood in 2021 and slightly more focused on activities. The results from the future wishes are presented here. 1/3 of the participants who made a Splot about the future expressed the wish for a proper toilet at the garden. Many users also wanted a playground so that children could play nearby. The users also wished for more social events where they could make meals together with vegetables from the garden. There were also a desire for more and better information about the events in the garden. Now I will give the word to Pia.
At the summer meeting in the end of November, we used a Mentimeter, an online survey, to check whether members agree with our findings. We first presented our findings and then asked, to what extent do our findings correspond with your thoughts about the garden? None answered to a small degree or not at all. We also asked members to grade a set of statements. 1 indicated agreement to a small extent and 5 to a large extent. The number in the end of the line is the average score. As you can see, the opportunity for contact with nature and natural surroundings and increased learning were the 2 statements that were scored highest at the evaluation meeting. Financial gain was rated lowest, and maybe because a parcel cost money. The average income in Lineary district in Oslo is lower than for the rest of the city. We found no major changes. Like the 2020 project, ours started at the end of the growing season, which we think may have had an impact on the findings. The infection control measures to stop the corona pandemic may also have influenced people's reflection on and use of the garden. Lots of Norwegians have participated in school and workplace activities to a large degree on digital forms. This may raise the importance of natural surroundings and a better social network both years. In 2020, the design of the area and its historical significance were important. But in 2021, production, homegrown vegetables, and climate change, climate positivity were important. The 2020 season was characterized by the startup of the garden and the preparation of the field. This year, or last year, the site were more established and fully cultivated. The desire for toilet may be due to the fact that the members spent more time in the garden. There were few who left Norway for holidays this summer, so maybe the garden was more visited throughout the summer. Member check indicates that our findings are valid. We recommend annual questionnaire plus Splot or focus group interviews to strengthen the project going forward. We would like to thank our teachers, Sebastian at the Norwegian University of Life Science, Sebastian Eiter, Wendy Fjelstad at NIBIO, and Stephanie Dengard at the City of Oslo for giving us this chance to join this project. And if you'd like to read more, here's the link to the 2020 study, and we hope our finding will be published later this year. And in this book session, you can read more about the Splot method. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to all 3 of you for an interesting and well-prepared presentation. Actually, there was one thing that struck me on the change slide between 2020 and 21, and that's what you mentioned, the reduced focus, or apparently reduced focus on neighborhood compared to other things. And I wonder whether that might be an indication of that the Living Lab is actually upscaling in terms of the catchment area within the city, that it might have been more local people from the city district in 2021, and then more including more people from other districts in 2021. So it will be interesting to follow this up. Yeah, it also illustrates some of the challenges that we have on how to measure the effects, to document the effects of living labs towards policymakers, decision makers, and maybe people supporting different initiatives financially, even if we've learned earlier today that not all initiatives are actually dependent on money. There's one question directly to you,
Okay.
a technical one. Maybe I should rather take it up as a suggestion to you and the others involved in the Living Lab in Oslo, and that is whether it might be possible to have a dry or composting toilet and reuse the excreta in the garden, and that could be a good achievement. So I think this question or suggestion is as much related to the responsible people at the city of Oslo or at the museum than to you with your study. But I just take it up as we had the time for it.
There is a toilet like that in the garden, but I don't think they reuse it. And I don't think everybody in the garden know where that toilet is, because they've hidden it so it won't be misused or turn upside down or anything.
Not put in a very prominent place, maybe, no. But yeah, good. Thanks again very much. And yeah, we will talk more in the discussion. Questions, still questions to Robert are kind of running in. So I would really encourage all the audience to use the like button and upvote the questions, because I think we have to be quite selective in the roundtable discussion on which questions we take up. So just during the coming presentations, if you like, follow the Q&A field and mark everything you like. Yeah, that was kind of social monitoring, and which we hope we'll be able to follow up in a cooperation with the local university. The next presentation is also based on a cooperation between a living lab and a local or at least regional university. Anneli Karlsson is a soil scientist by education. She's currently employed as the city team and living lab coordinator for EdiCitNet at the city of Andernach in the Rhine Valley in Germany. And her presentation has the title Small Bugs, Big Impact, Monitoring Beetles. Please, Anneli, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a small introduction of monitoring of beetles. Yes, I'm the representative of the city team and the living lab of Andernach. Today also representing the three scientists who worked on this particular study in our community garden. It's a collaboration between our nearby University of Koblenz in the Department of Biology, and two students in 2020 and 2021 performed a small study on beetles. So it's just a small introduction to everyone so that you know where we are and what we do. We're located in Western Germany in a province called Rhineland-Palatinate, and we have a city with a history of over 2,000 years. It's a small community in comparison to the previous cities we heard of, but with more than 31,000 inhabitants. It's, as you see on the map, a quite dense populated area around the river Rhine in the center here, as you can see here. Oh, sorry, here. But we also have large majority of forest around us. Andernach was city of edible goods already in 2010. So entering the Edible Cities network in 2018 was a nice upgrade. And with our knowledge about the incorporation of edible city solutions in the city had already taken place. But there are always things to learn, and we also learned a lot about our own environment in this case with the study of the beetles. So why did we engage the University of Koblenz? First of all, there were some personal connections to the professor of entomology, who was very interested in this kind of urban agricultural area. So the challenge was to determine the biology here in an urban setting. The focus was on beetles, and as you can see here, a selection like ground, rose, scarab, leaf, weevils, ladybirds, and many more, out of which I will only focus more or less on the ground beetles today. And the studies took place in 2020 with the student Gunnar Baramov, and in last year with Tyra Hoffmann. And the professor Thomas Wagner was the one supervising this. So the question was, how did they do this? They took upon themselves to study the biology here in the community garden situated in the outskirts of the city. And as you can see here in the picture, there's a recreational area. We have a football field, we have a swimming place, we have a racing cart, and we also have a youth center situated here. So this is a picture from 2019. So this is not the actual like it looks today. So the growing has increased by far. But anyway, the previous use of the area was only a grass lawn, mostly used for dog walks and festivals. And the ground itself is a loamy sand and has a high potential of yield. Why this is also a reason why we put the community garden here for the project. It's a quite dry but rather warm climate, as you can see here on the mean precipitation and the mean temperature over a 30-year span. So what kind of methodology do you use? Monitoring any kind of species like these needs to have permission. That means not every man can do this or woman. Doing this, it means that you will have to have the knowledge of the animals that you're here and the beetles that you're studying, not to harm any others. The use methods of pitfall traps. You can see this here on the three pictures that they use just normal honey jars in this case, and still fill these with concentrated sodium chloride. And after a specific time, these are emptied. And after sorting and cleaning up the bugs, they are also specified to their species. In 2020, they also had a different kind of trap of color traps that looks more or less like a frisbee that is put on a stick in the ground, which also attracts flying bugs from the other vicinity. So not only ground-dwelling beetles were captured in that study. So just as a brief intro, I will not overload too much with scientific information here, but it's quite interesting to see that the proportions of the species here in 2020 to the left, 2021 to the right, you can see that there are some differences. And you don't have to be an expert to see that the ground beetles in 2020 to 2021, there was quite a reduction. But what you also will see is there's also a huge increase in numbers of species. So what happened in 2021, apparently there were a lot more leaf beetles attracted to the pitfall traps and were captured. And we also had quite a set of weevils that were more or less the same over the period of time. But what was interesting was in the section of the ground beetles, there were some exceptional and extraordinary findings. I don't know who has experience with these, but whoever has the time to Google while I'm talking about them can see the real pictures. I didn't include all of them here. But in 2020, we found 922 different beetles out of 95 species. Above those, the rarity of Phonos brevicollis, a ground beetle, was the exceptional finding. This was the third sighting in Germany and the first sighting in this province. What that means is that this species has never before been sighted here. And the questions would be, why? And the third sighting in Germany, it's also interesting. Why hasn't it been collected before, or haven't we missed it? The previous discoveries of this species were a long time ago and could not really be manifested as secure species findings. So we are questioning ourselves, maybe this is really the first one ever. So what is the specificity of this bug? Well, it loves the warm, dry climate, and apparently Andernach has become such a place. That is also shown in the next year, with a vast majority of the species belonging to the ground beetles, but we had a lot of beetles collected, more than 1,500 in total, and 129 species. There are so-called early warning list species, and one of those, as you see here on the small picture, is the Brachynes explodens. It's a small bombardier beetle. I think many of the Mediterranean countries know of these beetles, but these are emerging, and apparently this species isn't as common as you would think, but with an affinity to the warm, dry climate, they tend to occur more oftenly. But still, they are on this warning list, saying that they're not yet endangered, but they could be in a couple of years coming. So also a rarity occurred. Astropeus olmi, roe beetle, was sighted for the third time in Germany. So with that sighting, another indication of warm, dry climate came up. So the question was the weather in Andernach, as it has been in the last 3 years, extremely dry and extremely warm. Exceptional, well, for 2021 was it that it was very rainy. So we are really interested to see what happens in the future, to see if this continues indication of Mediterranean species would prolong. So to conclude, why is it important to do this research? Well, first of all, we learn what happens just outside our doorstep. We learn why it's important to protect these kind of areas and why it's important to invest also in these areas. We don't use any pesticides, and we don't clear up all the areas in the community garden, meaning that the botany and the zoology, bugs and beetles, they have the possibilities to thrive in that kind of setting, which has become very rare, because we always tend to clear up, keep a nice lawn mowed, and the use of pesticides to counter other bugs or weeds. But this is not in the case in our community garden. We tend to just use our manual labor there to remove weeds that are disturbing, and try to encourage, whenever there's a bad bug, there could be also a good bug among them. And our findings now indicate this global warming, and the question, as I said before, is going to be, how can we continue the research? And for you who now have become a bit interested and want to know more, there is a Popular Science article out under this link. You will see that we had the collaboration with Nibio, helping us with the conceptualizing this article, and you will have more insight in the particular findings. So the next monitoring will take place in 2023. The working group of Mr. Wagner is very busy, and starting as a yearly investigation will have to turn into a biannual one. Nonetheless, we will continue to focus and see if we can find more interesting and found the idea of maybe the Mediterranean species establishing here. We also work for educational purposes. So the community garden and the beetle monitoring is part of the work that we do here together, for example, with the youth center, introducing small children and youth to the life in the gardens, and also how to deal with them and encourage to spread the word. What is also interesting, that the talk that just happened before ours was going in the direction that I'm wishing for Andernach. So the collaboration with the botany and the social studies would fit in perfectly. So I think I will catch up with the ladies in Norway for the next days to see if we can find something there. And at this point, I just want to thank the ones who are really did the work, and that's Thomas Wagner, Günay Baramov, Thyra Hofmann, Sebastian Eiter, and Wendy Fjellstad, because also my predecessor Iris Kröger was the one laying the ground to make this study happen. So thank you all for your collaboration. And if anyone is interested in what else happens in Andernach and what's going on, please visit our website. You will find a lot of information there, or contact me or the professor of the study. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Annelie, for underlining the potential environmental importance of urban gardening areas. A very nice contrast to having heard a lot about social aspects and some comments about the economic situation earlier. There are actually two questions directly related to you, and I think we have a couple of minutes to take them. One is a statement, ladybirds are our friends in the garden, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Your friends in the garden. And the other question is whether citizen science is planned to be part of the monitoring in 2023. And if yes, how? Probably.
Yes, absolutely. That's a big wish of ours. As I said, monitoring like we did now is scientific work. That means capturing the bugs and so on. But there are different citizen science approaches that we would love to use to be able to, capture them visually. They're kind of sheets where you can just tick off any box of the bugs that you see. We're in development of this together with the scientists in the network. So we'll be happy to do that. And with the support of the professor, I think we can achieve quite a lot.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, we can put you in contact with the professor of the students in public health science. It would be interesting to connect the different living labs even closer in the time to come, I think, in terms of monitoring, not the least. Yeah, so thanks again, Annelie. We'll talk more in roughly a quarter of an hour, I think.
Thank you, everyone.
Then I give the word to the final presenter of this session, who is Anna Angli. She's a geographer, currently working as an agroecological technician at the City Council of Sant Feliu de Llobregat, close to Barcelona in Catalonia, Spain. And as I mentioned, her presentation aims at strategy, a strategy for advancing agroecological schools in Sant Feliu de Llobregat. And I think some of the previous presentations have also shown that the educational aspect and the knowledge building aspect is or can be a very important part of the urban gardening movement as such. So please, Anna, the floor is yours, and welcome. And unmute yourself, please.
Hi. Hello, I'm Anna. I work on the environmental department of the Sant Feliu de Llobregat municipality, and we are a follower city of this EdiCitNet work. I'm here to talk about what we are doing for advancing on agroecological schools in Sant Feliu de Llobregat. And first of all, I want to explain why we are focused on social agroecology. And it relates to our social challenge. After a year that we have opening a lot of challenges, we have interviewing the relevant ECS in Sant Feliu, we have made city teams meetings, and we realize that there is a missing connection between ECS and between the inhabitants of Sant Feliu and the agricultural spaces of the city. We've got an agricultural park, and we have a mountain that is passing through a process of agroecological transition. So looking at these missing connections, we found our social challenge. And our social challenge is how to ensure that the inhabitants of Sant Feliu de Llobregat, in an inclusive and transversal way, that is important for us, are culturally, territorially, and economically connected to the agriculture and the food on their surroundings. For that, we thought that there are 4 fields of action. Those fields of action are social enhancement, territorial planning, consumption and commercialization, and school agroecology. And if you see the figure on the top, we have the relations, the interconnections between elements that we have right now. And we saw that there are not a lot of connections. So what we want to do with this EdiCitNet project is to make some relevant changes in Sant Feliu. So we need to begin in some elements that we can actually change. There are some that we cannot change because they are very huge, or maybe because we don't have the competences. So we thought that if we can enter in some elements in schools, we can make some changes, and then a lot of connections will take place between the other elements on the fields of action. So for example, if we work on scholar playgrounds and gardens, that will reinforce the community involvement and on those gardens. If we change the school canteens, that will have a direct relation on the short marketing circuits and local product promotions, and even to make new catering companies under the umbrella of social and solidarity economy. At last, for example, introducing the agricultural surrounding on the scholar curriculum may that in the future the students will create or build new projects on the agricultural spaces on Sant Feliu in the future. So resuming, our goal with Scholar Agroecology is to turn the schools into a change in Sant Feliu. And we thought that work on Scholar Agroecology is connect our fields of action. So to work on the Scholar Agroecology, we are working on 3 levels. We are working on school canteens, on school curriculum and the municipal plan of environmental education, and with school playgrounds and gardens. And school canteens. There are 19 schools in Sant Feliu. Of these 19 schools, there's just one who has an organic and kilometer zero canteen. These canteens are managed by the families. The families hired the catering companies. But the kindergartens are managed by the municipality. So this year, the contract that we have with the canteen company who managed the 3 public kindergarten will finish. And then we have work on the specifications of this public procurement. And in this public procurement, we have introduced the criteria of ecological and proximity. What does it mean? But because until now it was always about price. So normally the school canteens is like a cheap food, and there's not a real healthy diet culture made on these canteens. So making these criteria, we think that we are working on the culture of healthy diets with children, and we think that that is going to improve the short circuits of marketing that will stimulate the demand of local products and organic products, so that it gives opportunities to the farmers that are actually now in Sant Feliu, or maybe the future farmers that can come to our agricultural bases. But also it can be the motor to create green logistics or catering companies made like co-ops or associations. In other hand, what we are doing now is a diagnosis of all the scholar canteens, where the food comes from, how it's cooked, etc., etc. And the idea is to share the diagnosis with the families and accompanying them to integrate organic and proximity criteria in the canteens of public schools, or maybe private too. Then what we'd like to do on the next future is to create a network between the canteen management companies and the local farmers. And if we go a step forward, we want to create a food canteen council involving all the community. Well, other element that we are working is the scholar curriculum and the municipal plan of environmental education. First of all, we cannot really change the scholar curriculum because it's a competence of the state. But as a municipality, we have this program of environmental education that is provided by the City Council Environmental Service Office. And we work on a program called More Sustainable Schools. And this program, what we do is accompanying schools to some actions around an environmental challenge every year. For now, this year, we are focused on agroecology, and we made a program called Feed of Sant Feliu. And this program, what does is it provides resources to the teachers to work with students the subject of food sovereignty. So we accompany the schools to draw these programs towards food transition, but we also encourage the exchange between schools. And we are trying to involve the educational community to increase food sovereignty in Sant Feliu. To help us with this program, we had hired a co-op called La Ortiga, that they are organic farmers and they are environmental educators. So again, without that, the public procurement can be a little motor of change by ECS. This program works on all the levels of education. For example, for kindergarten, it calls Let It Here, and it's a more sensorial program to discover the gardens and the edible plants on the school gardens. With elementary schools, the thing is to discover the links between what happens in their plates, in the tables, in their homes or school, and in the field. So they're gonna discover the farmers in Sant Feliu, the markets, etc. And in secondary, it's more focused on the problematics given by the huge agro-industry on the land and on the economics, and the food waste who is related. And in the end, we are working with school playgrounds and the gardens. Until now, school playgrounds used to be great place, very sunny, where there's no life. So we think that it's necessary to transform these playgrounds to small climate shelters and provided them with shade, vegetation spaces and bloom measures. So for now, 7 schools have already reformed the playgrounds last year. So we accompany them to make these changes. And with school gardens, for now, almost every school has a little food garden, but normally teachers has not the resources to really grow these gardens or to link with the subjects in the curriculum. So with the program Feed of Sant Feliu, we are accompanying these teachers to make these places like an educational place too. And with kindergartens, for now, we are trying to involve the families to be in these gardens. So make the gardens on the schools a kind of community garden. So that's the 3 elements that we are working. And well, just I'm going to finish to thank you. And if you have some questions, you can always write me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for this presentation. And yeah, I mean, the main tasks of the follower cities within the EdiCitNet project is actually to plan for edible city solutions in the future. And I think it makes perfectly sense that you then address the youth and the kids in this future perspective and try to anchor the thinking and the practice from the very beginning. And yeah, you also referred to some regulation or maybe legal administrative barriers that you may expect. And this is also something that has been mentioned in earlier presentations in this session. So I think when we now soon go over to the discussion, I think there are quite a number of points that will be able to relate the different presentations to one another. I see in the chat you have earned quite a lot of thanks. See, there is one concrete question to you in the Q&A here. When introducing your school programs for environmental education and food sovereignty, did you experience any pushback from parents and other stakeholders, particularly thinking that these programs are part of a certain political ideology, or let's say can be perceived as being part of a certain political ideology, or are these topics considered neutral? What is the cultural attitude towards this weird one from Britain in the previous session? But yeah,
I think even if talking about food sovereignty is a political position, on the context that we have of climate change, or maybe, for example, last year Barcelona was the world capital of sustainable alimentation. So there's a perspective that they don't feel very political. It's very easy to talk about this with families and with people, because as everybody eats 3 times per day, I think we have a good reception from part of the families. I don't feel like we are indoctrinating children. I don't know if I get well the ask.
Otherwise, we invite the person to follow up, of course. Thank you so much. Yeah, and yeah, of course, I think pushbacks is also something that can be related to different of the topics we have had. For example, whether, for example, Prinzessinnengarten has experienced resistance by mourning people and attitudes towards converting the cemetery into an edible place. And yeah, so good. I think yeah, we are actually just in time to open the floor to all you panelists again. I think the tech team will take care of it in the background. And yeah, we have met for 2.5 hours already, and we have 30 minutes more before we have the lunch break. So already thanks to all the 130 plus of you who are still remaining. And yeah, let's see. I think I would like to open with one aspect that struck me a bit in Martina's opening presentation, and which I think is important for most initiatives, and that is she underlined a bit that awareness or consciousness is a very important issue among the population, and it's a bit also it depends how edible initiatives are perceived by the public and in general. And I mean, this is maybe a question to all of you, not all of you are necessary an answer to that, but have you in your work observed certain things or actions that where you think, oh, that was really a good way to raise consciousness, maybe among groups or single actors who were not aware of the importance of food, the food relations within the city, and yeah, human food relations in general. I put it openly.
I can answer from our point of view. I think our method is just to practically raise consciousness by inviting people to work in the garden with us, you know, and I think that is an experience people have a lack of. If you look at children, some children don't want to eat our carrots because they think they were in that dirt before, and they mean the soil. And, you know, this is a way of raising consciousness by just showing them where they grow, but it's the same for adults as well. People in the city, they don't have to have a clue where their food comes from. So from our side, it's a practical experience which is given.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, part of the background for this question is that yesterday evening, all the parents in our local school band were invited to participate in a research project on food waste. Not primarily to contribute to the research project, but to earn money for the band. And when I was filling in the questionnaire, I thought, well, this is actually also a way to raise consciousness and awareness on food waste, a topic that Martina mentioned in her presentation, among people. And if it's designed as a participatory thing, it may actually reach out to quite a broad number of people. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words.
Please.
I think it's very interesting that with the different aspects of indicators or focus that we put into, as here we have presented today, the ecological focus, environmental focus, but also that by collecting these things, you will find, as in our case, rare findings that we didn't know were possible. And of course, it's surprising not only for the scientists. I mean, they were I think jumping high when they saw what they found, but also this has a secondary value to other participants, as I said, for the children, for the education, but also for us in the city administration to say that what areas are of value. You know, it's if we talk about just open spaces, but it's kind of what kind of space do we open for? And this community garden apparently has a space for these rare species, and maybe it's worth saving. You know, this gives us the tools to argue for the conservation of such areas. So in that way, focusing on different indicators can be surprising in the outcome. So that's why I said with the presentation name, small bugs, big impact, because it didn't just affect them, it affects us all. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Annelie. Any further thought?
Yeah,
Martina, yeah.
Maybe I can
please.
add something, because I think this
course.
question is very interesting, and it's great to hear also from the practical partners what their experiences are. And yeah, I think like Robert said, it's really so much about experience. And I think when we talk about sustainability and transformation, also when it comes to food habits, it's often so negatively turned. So now I have to reduce my meat consumption, or now I should also eat no avocados anymore. But I think when you once jumped into experiencing that it's not so complicated to have a sustainable diet, and that it also makes fun, because you get also something back in terms of feeling that you feel proud, that you feel that you're really contributing something positive to this world. And I think this is so important to experience, that it makes also fun and joy. And this also links again what Mary said. And yeah, and it's really interesting to see to these different effective turning points, why it's different people came to different changes in their diets. And this is also what we are researching about. And for instance, when I add some private story, because I studied also agriculture science, and I've worked on different farms, a turkey farm and a dairy farm, and I still can know how it smelled, how the animals felt and behaved. And it was also disgusting, and it made me feel so sad. So this is a negative type of experience, but it also changed how I relate now to food and how we produce it.
Yeah, thank you. Pia, I guess it's your hand, since you are visible.
During the Splot, a lot of people said that they wanted a playground next to the growing area. And I think that was because they want to take the children and make them learn about growing vegetables and how pollination happens and stuff like that. And so I think that was a good finding. And also in the linear garden, some adolescents gets to work during school projects, and that's also a way to make people know about how to grow and how to make cities sustainable, of course, and also to reduce food waste. So yeah, and also I would like to say that when we asked the question, there was a lot of people who said that just by being in the field, they the sound and colors made them feel that they were back home where they came from. So maybe you came from Africa, and the smell and colors of the flowers made them feel more comfortable and a part of a society. And that's also a big and important issue during this case, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
Yeah, I just want to underline a bit what Martina said, because I think it's very important to give a positive approach to sustainable acting. You know, it's like, if you just read in the media, you're not supposed to eat avocados anymore, you're not supposed to eat meat, you're not supposed to do that. That is a difficult approach towards that subject. But if you experience, like, it's like empowerment by doing yourself, by growing vegetables. We have courses on how to make soap and how to ferment and all these kinds of things. And it's or make cheese. It's such a nice experience to do the things yourself, and then you want to eat them no matter if it's meat or not. So that positive, joyful approach, I think, is very important. It doesn't mean the other one is not important, because that's scientific, that's the basis we're working on, but in addition.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I think I'll start picking some upvoted questions from the actual Q&A session. And the first one is actually directed towards monitoring. And yeah, I mean, Ina writes that it was already a topic in the discussion with Mary in the first session today. Which type of monitoring makes sense beyond producing scientific evidence? What makes most sense for the change maker, for the practitioners to monitor? For example, monitoring that discover optimization potential, monitoring that analyzes failures or others, or I could add monitoring that where data can convince politicians or decision makers to set aside area to invest, to support, or whatever. Maybe the practitioners have the least experience with monitoring, and the scientists have the least experience in what kind of monitoring helps. So maybe you're a bit dependent on one another to answer this question, actually, or could you imagine would help, and towards whom, for deciding what is what makes most sense, or what is most effective to do and concentrate on. Does any of you have thoughts about that? Yeah, Robert, your hand, and then Anneli, please.
I'm going to unmute. Okay.
Yeah, please just say unmuted for that.
Yeah, sorry. As I heard in the first session, I fully agree on that. The main issue is cultural change. That's difficult to make, but that's the main thing we should all be working on, no matter if we're scientists or gardeners or whatever. So every scientific work which helps to gather arguments for this cultural change, no matter, you have different target groups, you know, you have the politicians, and they might need different informations than just the neighborhood for their own personal acting. So from my perspective, it's not very important what is monitored, it's what do you do with it afterwards then? And do you think while monitoring what to do with it afterwards?
Yeah, thank you. Anneli?
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. I agree. I mean, what is interesting is when you choose an impact, a factor, something to collect, you think in mostly terms of your own interest and your own gain. But opening up, like we do in this project, is that we open up for different stakeholders to use that data. That means that we're spreading the knowledge, and everyone out of, if it's an NGO, if it's a municipality, if it's a small business, everyone can take the information from that indicator and use it for their purpose. And that means a multiplication of efforts of that outcome that we want to. I mean, the currency was kindness and the outcome was joy. So that was what I took from the first session that we had. But for example, with like I said, with the beetles, the scientist is continuing the studies for the students, and that's a part of the education, as well as to youth and children here in schools and the youth center. But for us in the city administration, it's always about how can we find arguments to place a protection or broker for a prolongation of something. That's what this evidence can be about. So it's always nice to see other people collecting data when you see that, oh, I can, have a piece of the pie too and profit from it.
Yeah, thanks, Annelie. And Pia, please.
I think we have another approach, maybe because we are public health master students, but I think the participation approach, which we had, where we went to a dialogue with the users, I think that's also a really important issue to make this grow as a project. And what we found was that it was quite hard actually to get people to participate in our study. We tried with a focus group interview, and then we got 2 people who voluntarily. We didn't call that a group, so we had to make another approach. So I think it's both important to have quantitative and qualitative data to make it more strong. Yeah, I hope you understand what I meant.
Yeah, you get a great yes in the chat, and I think that's also what this session so far has illustrated very nicely. It's so diverse and broad, this topic, and so many different people get together around food, and not least in cities. So it's yeah, all about trying to be inclusive and capturing different aspects, and it's a challenge to choose the ones, because one always has to choose and prioritize, of course. Yeah. I see one more question here. Well, it seems that Martina, you have some experience from Andernach, from the pre-EdiCitNet period, and people are wondering whether you could share some of experiences with working in, or maybe even with, the city of Andernach, and things that have worked well and maybe not so well, at least not in the beginning. And yeah, maybe I think we have time that you can elaborate a few minutes about that, which may be interesting, because Andernach is yeah, it's one of our front-runner cities with a rather long history, relatively long history in being an edible city, actually.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we have been in Andernach, I think it was 2017 and 18, where we had different expert interviews. And of course, we had a look at Andernach, and it was great to be there and to talk with these people. And yeah, maybe I can share 2 issues which just came into my mind, which were very inspiring and interesting. Because first of all, we thought when we go to Andernach and we analyze how the implementation worked out, we thought they have a lot of strategies and paperwork and so on and so forth, but it was not the case at all. And I found it really inspiring. And when the 2 guys working at the city of Andernach told us they just did it. So they were just experimenting. It was very easily. They had really the support of the mayor during this time, and it was very less bureaucratic. And I think this is really a good example for Andernach, which is not such a big city. And this was clearly the opposite in Munich, where we also had some expert interviews, because this is a huge city and the communication is so long and everything is so bureaucratic. So I really liked this approach to just do it, because it's really nice to approach this edible city concept. And what we also found out during our service, which is still in my mind, is that we found it very interesting that not so many people have been engaged during this time. So they are very proud about the city. They have a really strong place attachment because it got also so famous because of the media announcements. But they're not really engaged by taking part in different activities, and they also not use so much the food, as we found out in a survey with over 300 people. And we compared this to the urban vegetable gardeners in Munich, and there we found really much more stronger human food connections compared to Andernach. And when we talked also with the guys in the city here, they also were aware about it. And I think they just started also more collaborations and to try to get the people on board, because I think it's both important to have the city administration, which is engaged, and then also the residents to work together.
So you think in a smaller municipality, it may be easier to get the allowance to just start, while in a larger one, you may be able to just start without being discovered by the administration immediately?
Yeah, maybe like in Munich, because there's a lot of bottom-up approaches, many NGOs, many residents, because there's also the pressure so high in urban green spaces, which is also maybe not the case in Andernach, I guess. And yeah, we're all very frustrated that the city of Munich is not so much supporting them. And it's also depending who has the power in the 4 years. So
yeah. Yeah, well, I see that most of the remaining questions in the chat are actually directed to Mary. So I guess she will need to answer them individually. I don't know whether you will start getting a bit tired of writing questions. We have 10 more minutes left of the discussion. I could actually offer you, if you like, in the audience, to just raise your hand and ask a question orally, if you like. I can give you the word if you think it's more comfortable than writing. You will not be visible anyway, but we'll be able to hear you, or for any other remark or observation that you have made, comparing the content of the different presentations that we had in all its diversity and breadth. I don't see any raised hands right now. There's just a new question appeared written here. I'm not sure who was first, Annelie or the written question. I take the written question, and maybe Annelie can contribute to answer it and then come with her remark. And that is a question whether, from our partner in Rotterdam, how far monitoring could help negotiate funding in ECS as an ecosystem service. So this is maybe closely related to the environmental monitoring, not at least. So I think I give the word to Annelie, whether you answer this question or take your original remark in the beginning, please. Yeah,
absolutely, good question. No, of course. When you think about the tight funding, I know that Mary spoke about economy as a general thing. It's always hard to generate funds. I think every city and every initiative is struggling with how can I continue what I'm doing, and if I have the foundation of the monitoring, undermining, like, this is what I can provide. And if the people can see that, you will have to make it visible. And I think that's where most of the trouble starts. For initiatives to come to the city administration, maybe like in Munich, does the city administration, the municipality, do they recognize what you have and see this as something good to invest in? Because the money is always tight. So I think lobbying for the less attractive things, like saying this area is now restricted to this kind of use, or we're not gonna open another bar or something like that, because we need this green space to just be like that. As an experience in the city administration of Andernach, we always struggle with, all right, we have an area, it doesn't look very appealing. And then we'll get phone calls saying, why does it look like that? And then we say, well, it has an ecological service, you know, it fills a purpose. The plants are supposed to die and dry out completely to be able to produce the seeds to fall to the ground. And that's why we don't mow them before. So it's a real struggle. So brokering for an ECS for funding, that's a real struggle. But I think I don't want to cover more of that, so I'll just skip with my remark, and if there's time left afterwards or in the session tomorrow, I'll be there. So let's put Robert on.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to mention from our perspective as a grassroots that funding is not always just positive. Yeah, surely data connection can help by doing that, but funding means on one hand losing some independency, especially if you institutionalizedly funded, and on the second hand, you cut that connection between work and money for the people working in the garden. You know, because you have some people who are able to apply for the fund, and the people really working in the garden, they don't see that work, they don't really understand because they don't do it. So from our perspective for initiatives, it's very, very, it's a lot of value to have your own income in terms of, for example, running a cafe or doing school gardens and getting paid for it, or having income independent from funding. Sorry, I know that was not the question, but I wanted to say that. And then there was a question in the chat if Corona, the situation during the pandemic, had some influence on our work. Yes, it surely had, but sounds funny, but in a way it had positive effects because we're outside, you know, and outside was allowed and everything was closed. So suddenly we had much more participants than we could handle in the gardening part, while on the other hand, a cafe was closed and we had financial problems according to that. But generally, a lot of people, I think every crisis so far had a positive effect on what we do. We started in 2009 and we would have never started as successful if there wouldn't have been the crisis in 2008 and people thought, well, I don't go to Thailand for my next holiday, I look at what's happening in front of my door.
Yeah, actually, there's, I guess there's a broad variety of effects. And of course, if people are not supposed to travel abroad, they may concentrate on gardening locally. But when the restrictions then include a prohibition to meet one another or in larger groups, it may restrict the activity or the participation again. So I understand that this question was directed for first and foremost to you, Robert, and Anna. With all the kids, maybe there have been some restrictions too, whereas Martina's research was mainly conducted before the pandemic. And yeah, I don't know whether any of Pia, Marit, and Thea's respondents mentioned something about the situation. Yeah, please, Anna.
Yeah, I will be very, very short. No, the pandemic, yes, has affected a lot because we were not allowed to meet. So a lot of social movements has been debilitated because we don't have this space to meet. But another, for the restrictions of the pandemic, one of the restrictions was it was impossible to get out to the municipality on the weekends. So then the inhabitants of Sant Feliu and the families discovered the agricultural park and the mountains. So a lot of people now on weekends go to the fields and has created some connections between the farmers. Now the farmers has increased the direct sales because now one of the things people go to the fields and say, oh, give me some carrots or some stuff. For example, we've got one of our farmers has made a little shop in these fields, and this little shop was on Saturdays, is where all the children want to be. So it has been positive in some ways.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll have one more upvoted question. By the way, just to refer back to what Robert just said, I think the first part of his contribution illustrated very nicely a law that not only applies to urban agriculture, and that one size doesn't fit all, whether you need funding or don't want funding, or aim at the one or the other aspect, or include different types of people into your activities. A question by Wendy: could it be an irony that when a city administration tries to encourage urban gardening, the people feel it is something the city does and is responsible for? Does fighting for land and doing it yourself actually make people more engaged and committed? I guess Robert would answer yes to that.
In a way,
others, yeah.
I mean, we can't do without political support. You know, it's mostly a question of space, and you can't just keep the space because you're not able to be in concurrence money-wise with building on the space. There's no way. So we definitely need that support. But sometimes when administration starts to support, it gets very complicated because they have very complicated rules. And then little initiatives are not capable of fulfilling those rules. So you need, it's about free space, and free space includes some kind of freedom of doing things, and you can't just communicate for every little bits and bobs with the administration, which takes ages, and it's very different speeds. So in a sense, sometimes support makes things more difficult, but in general, we just need it. Otherwise, we can't survive as urban gardens.
Yeah, thank you. There just came in another quite upvoted question, which I personally think is very interesting, but I guess we won't have time for this here now. But if any of the coming presenters of this conference hear it, maybe they can try and integrate it a little bit into what they're going to tell. And then that's a question by Ruth Mart. How do you celebrate success in your projects? And I guess this also will differ quite a lot how you do it. And yeah, what do you see as success? I mean, Mary was very clear. If we achieve a high level of kindness, that's success. And yeah, and that's also a lot related to monitoring. When can we say that a development, a change over time is a success or not? So it's maybe important also for keeping up the motivation to have in mind what are our goals, and then yeah, actually enjoy achieving them in small steps or in larger steps. Yeah, time is running out actually. I think we should round off. Any unanswered questions? There are still some. They will be answered in a follow-up email, written in the chat, in whatever way. There's another session today starting in 1 hour on edible city policies and strategies. Robert just said, well, we are dependent on the politicians and political support anyway. So I think this will be very interesting. It's starting in 1 hour at 2. My sincere thanks again to all you panelists and presenters for your contributions, to all the attendees having remained for now 3 hours in a row, basically, stayed with us, and not at least a very big thank to the tech team in the background for really smooth operation of this session and switching among this and that and many things. They will have one job left now, and that is probably upgrading the illustrator, Johnny Glover, to being a panelist. So he will be able to share his drawing with us, and I think it will remain shared during the lunch. So if you're sitting in your office alone or even in your home office, get your food and yeah, maybe try and think a bit through what perceptions of the artist do I agree with, what does it stimulate me to, and yeah, take the time for some reflection and refreshment and maybe fresh air before hopefully most of us meet again in 1 hour after lunch for the next session, which will be led by Max Manderscheid from the University of Life Sciences in Vienna. Thank you for me. and goodbye.